This week's episode was brought to you by www.com, the only website available in 5D for non-Euclidean hyperdating. Why be limited to swiping only left or right? At www.com, you can swipe not only left or right, but up, down, forward, back, and in a direction 90 degrees to all of them. Useful for getting rid of those squares, if you know what I mean. At www.com, when you didn't hear this from me, you can even ghost people in the future. I know how it sounds, but once you give it a try, I'm sure you'll be convinced. www.com is the only way to date. Thank you, www.com. If you'd like to support the show, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where $5 earns you an exquisite 5x5 vinyl sticker of our cover art and all our extended episodes and access to our Discord server, which is actually a secret Illuminati trapezoid that's full of lizards. On this week's show, Mari and myself take the form of two vulgar physics demons to discuss the implications of dealing with dimensions greater than 3, D&D dice, Edwin A. Abbot's Flatland, and in the extended episode, we visit Peter Carroll's chaos magic classic, Apophenion, dive into non-Big Bang cosmology and the vorticitating hyper-spherical universe. Please make sure your seatbelt is on while your seat is in the upright position. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
How did you let him get away?
That's what you do with Kirby's. You eat Kirby's, and then you gain the Kirby power of eating others.
No.
That's why you have to seek a Kirby to eat.
How could you let him get away?
We could find him on the astral and drag him back to our dimension. That seems to be the advantage of having a dimension above somebody else, is that you can completely manipulate them and know pretty much everything about them in a way that is entirely prohibitive to their privacy.
Like watching fish in a barrel.
Yes, exactly. It's like how you see things in video games. It's like they're
like
playing
the top down.
like they're playing games with us. And who are they anyway?
Aliens.
Hello everybody and welcome to the 9th season premiere of The Whole Rabbit, where we don't just assume that because we're three-dimensional beings attending to our grocery shopping, milking cows and getting bikini waxes, that we've seen all there is to see, observed our lives from every angle, and discovered the basement of our beings. No! We, upon being visited by higher dimensional beings, harass them about higher yet dimensions, frustrating and confusing our alien friends, arousing in them frustration, which sends us hurling back to the very dimension from which this message is being broadcast. I'm your host, Luke Madrid, and today I'm joined by the canine queen herself, Mari Sama.
Howdy, y'all.
Okay, Mari, is the fourth dimension time, or is it something else? Let's just get right to it.
I mean, I would reckon that it is time.
If we're to believe, based on our experience, we experience time a lot like the inhabitants of Flatland experience space. They could just move in one direction, and that's it. Well, they can even move in two directions in Lineland, back and forth. Us in time, we're just like moving straight forward through it.
Correct.
We know there's other ways to move through it, right?
Right, but the entire basis of the universe and all of the laws of physics would have to be completely different for it to flow backwards.
I didn't create a specific section for it, but there is such thing as retro-causality, where if you make a sufficiently complicated experiment, you can cause something to kind of go back in time and change the result in a way.
Technically, mathematically, that's possible, but the way that entropy flows naturally, it makes it extremely difficult. Like, it would take an immense amount of power to do something like that.
Well, perhaps then from a higher dimension, if time is one, okay, or from a higher perspective, maybe there would be another name for entropy. Maybe that concept wouldn't make sense.
No, well, it might look like maybe a current in a stream, but like if you're outside of a stream, you can walk upstream and look down into the water there.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like so when you're outside of 3D space or 4D space, I guess, as you'd say, it's not, you can't really quantify how it would look, but pretty much you'd see a body that represents the entire time continuum of like individuals. So you would see the entire time space continuum as like one object instead of it being like a slice, because we view time as like, oh, the present is a slice of time, right?
And we kind of get like that. We can break that into slices and understand it because of like film and movies do that.
Right, but we're only able to live on one slide at a time, whereas like a being that's outside of it could watch a movie, or so to speak, they're looking at a whole loaf of bread and not just one slice.
It's like
and
we'd be a big long worm.
Exactly. And like Donnie Darko does this really cool, like crappy CG effect at some point in the movie where he sees this like serpentine snake like thing come out of his chest and like project around his house where he's going to walk. So like that's kind of like a movie trying to show a fourth dimensional perspective.
Yeah, it's analogous to his understanding of what's going to happen all at once. That's the only way they can show it in the movie.
It's a projection from his chest, so it follows his heart. So that would be like the electromagnetic field around your heart or your soul. Like, I guess it's a projection they're trying to portray it as his soul or something. But he could see the timeline of his soul moving through the house, and then he gets up and walks it as it's projecting out of him. So that's how that movie interprets. Like, it's not necessarily time travel, but it's like being able to see the time stream in real time.
Persistently in Flatland, do they come up against the idea that higher dimensional beings can see straight into your body cavity, and that the idea of like what your body holds radically changes, and that's sort of where we conceptualize those higher dimensions being hidden is inside of us? That's at least one motif I've recognized.
And a helpful way to think about it is like, okay, we perceive in 3 dimensions, right? So you're looking at, say, we're looking at a cube.
Yeah.
Technically, classically, we could only see 3 sides of the cube at a time because we're 3-dimensional beings.
Okay.
So if you're a hyperdimensional being, which means you're beyond space-time, which is the first 4 dimensions, you would be able to see every single side of the cube and inside of it simultaneously.
See, that sounds useful.
Yes, it's, and it's something like, yeah, you could pretty much see around every corner because there is no corners in that perspective. Like you can see kind of like how we could see inside of a Flatlander's body.
Yeah.
It's like they would see us as like unwrapped people. Like we would be this weird unwrapped entity that looks almost worm-like along the space-time continuum. I don't know, but you can't even explain what they would see because we don't have that concept.
Well, in this analogy, you would be your embryonic baby self coming out of your mom's stuff between her legs on the one side, and then you becoming old and dying or getting destroyed in a car crash or something on the other extreme. But your life would be like a big snake, or like you said, a loaf of bread connected between those 2 points. And
like when you examine a slice, it'd be like a diorama or like a memory, like a movie that plays.
Well, that's our lives. It's almost like we're moving through a memory if you look at it from that perspective.
From that perspective, you could also rewind and play stuff back. You know what I mean? Like it is a movie.
And it wasn't movies that got me into the occult either. Like Tolkien's Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings, or Harry Potter. I used to wake up at 5 a.m. and watch Mr. Wizard, and he showed me how to break flowers with nitroglycerin and play with lasers, which is pretty cool.
Break flowers, eh?
Yeah. You put them in nitroglycerin and they look like they're still flowers, but then you smash them against the table and he's like, look at that, kid. You stick your hand in there still?
Wild buck, weren't you?
Oh, man. I had all that energy to wake up at, 4:45, turn on Nickelodeon, where the old man would teach the little kid how the lasers worked on a CD or something like that. That was super high tech back then. Those were like, they had full size, like the size of records in the I think. At least they looked that big to me when I was a kid. Anyway, I was tourizing San Francisco and I found The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene. And because I had never done chemicals yet, I found myself in a psychedelic world where objects shrank along their axis of velocity, experienced time travel, light was capable of producing observer paradoxes, and even acted differently depending on whether or not it was being observed. Pulling in, of course, retrocausality and sufficiently complex experiments like the dual slit experiment, which in its basic form is pretty easy to understand. It's like you got 2 holes and you're shooting light through them 1 photon at a time. If you don't look at them, the result on the plate behind it seems to be that light is behaving like a wave. But if you observe which hole the photon is going through, well, the result seems to be that the light acts more like a particle. And so you're like, well, what the heck, universe, is light a wave or a particle? And so it was that kind of stuff in general that got me into magic. So I'm a little behind on getting a fancy cloak. It's more like a bathrobe.
Well, that's kind of cool too. It's a Hugh Hefner vibe there with the bunnies.
I will admit, I think my dad owns every Playboy since the 60s.
You should steal them.
I've seen them all. It's been a while since I've had a favorite or anything, you know. That was back in the before times, in the Peach Fuzz days, if you will. Brian Greene said in his book, now to be fair, I haven't read it in 10 years, but he says that mathematicians have been tripping themselves out for a long time and creating formulas and drawing diagrams and finding strange patterns. And for the most part, these would just end up in tombs, in libraries, in colleges, as bona fide stuff that had happened in math and it was now recorded. But at some point, when physics would find something strange, they would oftentimes find in those old math tombs that what they were observing had been described in mathematics, maybe a century or two prior. It had gotten to the point now with string theory where the mathematicians and the physicists were working in the same room, shoulder to shoulder, and helping each other with their work. That's how abstract it had gotten. But the point is that they had begun working on these things called Calabi Yau Manifolds. Do I know what those things are? Not really. But if I remember correctly, it's something like a visual mathematical abstraction of a 10-dimensional universe. And you have millions of these because they all represent a potential possible universe. What's important about that is that each one can be cut in half and then pasted with another one to create a coherent pair. And that each and every one had exactly one pair.
Well, it's symmetrical.
Yeah, in some way.
Symmetry is a very important part of particle physics.
So the world that was described by Brian Greene in The Elegant Universe was so strange that I just came to the conclusion that, all right, there's something going on here that we, as three-dimensioners, have completely forsaken and have probably gotten religion and magic and spirituality and positive thinking all wrapped up in it. And gosh darn it, I'm going to figure it out for myself, being the young whippersnapper that I was. And I think the first example that I could just pull out of the book real easy for, okay, what's so weird about all this stuff? We'll take the Mobius Strip, right? You know what a Mobius Strip is? I'm sure you do.
Oh, yeah.
What's a Mobius Strip?
It's a two-dimensional plane that actually twists into 3 dimensions. So it really only has it has 2 surfaces, the upside and the downside, but it forms this 3-dimensional chain link structure that's infinite. Like you can walk forever on it and there's no seam.
Another way to describe it is if you took a long strip of paper and instead of making instead of looping it around like a rubber band, is if you cut the rubber band and twisted it once and then glued it back together, or the strip of paper for that matter.
Yeah.
And it's that twist that's important because that technically, if the piece of paper is a 2D plane, right? The twist, you are necessarily twisting it through the 3rd dimension. Why is that important? It's because it grants magical properties to the 2nd dimension by virtue of it bending through the 3rd. So how would that look to a Flatlander? It's like, okay, if you're an ant and you're at the starting point on a Mobius strip, you could just walk a straight line along the strip, and at some point you would return back to the exact same point that you started without turning or doing anything.
Like video game logic, where when you go off the screen, your guy comes on the other side of the screen.
But the person who's playing the game has to move their eye to the other side of the screen to deal with that phenomena. For the ant, it's seamless. There's no jump. They just are like, whoa, I'm back here again.
Yeah.
So what if time is like that? I mean, I'm not saying it is, but it could be. How would we know? I mean, if we're experiencing time in just a straight line shit, is it possible then that magic or positive thinking or just the fact that the universe is a cruel, impersonal knot of Cthulhu's tentacle butt hairs, that perhaps we loop and twist and turn through the other dimensions of time all the time? And that's why we get deja vu and dementia and good and bad ideas and horny for no reason. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. That could totally explain why time is cyclical and we return to certain aspects. But to me, in a way, I think that we're moving in more of a spiral because things change, but they subtly change. You'll have a trend come back in style, but there'll be a different flair about it. Or, a war will repeat, but it'll be a different group of people fighting it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Okay, yes, absolutely.
like time will repeat itself often. And that's, to me, that's like, when I was a kid, I hate history because I'd have to memorize stuff, and I'm really not good at memorizing anything. But my teachers would always say, like, it's really important to learn history because history repeats itself. And it's important to like stop that from happening. You have to know what happened before. Like, you have to know every detail about what happened before so that it won't happen again. Or that you would repeat something that's good. You know what I mean? So to me, it's like time has always been cyclical. And it doesn't matter what age you're in or what trends are there or what style it is or what it looks like or what tech we have. And that's something Terence McKenna was arguing, is that the time cycles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So like you're seeing trends get shorter and shorter and shorter.
Well, the 70s seem to come back a little more frequently than the others.
Right. But like in the 90s came back just now. But like before, it took 30 years for something to come back, and now it's like 20 years. And then also think about it. Any meme fans out there, if you got any like memeaholics, okay, remember back in the old internet days and memes lasted for like years? And then
they were around a while. Now they kind of cycle through in like a day, 2 days, a week.
Or like a week. Yeah. So like the meme cycle has gotten a lot shorter, and that's probably more indicative of like where like time is shortening, like time is moving faster as we progress. That's what Terence McKenna was arguing. And it seems to be true. It seems to be like the more connection, the more awareness, and the more consciousness we have, the more time seems to accelerate, and information accelerates through time.
So maybe
stuff happens faster.
So like basically, whatever we're experiencing in terms of time might because it has structure and it's doing a thing. That's very vague, I guess.
Like a parabolic curve. You've seen those, right? Like it starts off like a slow trend going up, and then it goes up 45 degrees, and then it just goes up exponentially like crazy all the way to the top, and there's like no plateau. That's kind of like what time is doing. It's like that upward curve.
Unless we're talking about open world video games like Cyberpunk, in which case it all peaked in 2013. And it's actually getting worse.
I think that trend happens with a level of awareness or consciousness that's present in a certain volume of space. So the more compound observers you have in a space, like we were talking about in the other physics episode, remember we were talking about how like the more dense gravity is, and the more observers you have in a place of space, slower time moves.
Yes.
Right? So why wouldn't that work with like any observers? Could have like an area of space with like a ton of observers where time goes really fast, but in other parts of the universe where there's no one there, it could go really slow.
Now, I'm being a bit coy with you because eventually we're going to get to Peter Carroll's non-Big Bang cosmology, and he starts to provide an alternative model of the universe. And a lot of the things you're bringing up pertain to that. Specifically, the idea that he brings up this idea that maybe it's not gravitons. And since writing the text Apophenion, we've detected gravitons, but there's still the idea that gravity can be modeled as a curvature of space-time. And so he has a rap to say about the curvature of the space-time and what it might be doing in terms of...
I think it's extending into other dimensions, which is why it's diluted in the third dimension. Wherever you have a concentration of mass, I would argue that mass is an observer. It doesn't have to be conscious. Like any congregation of molecules would be like an observer, technically. So then the mass would generate gravity because it extends into the other dimensions of space-time. So it would create this like anchor of gravity throughout the other dimensions, but we don't necessarily see.
You're coming at me a million miles an hour with this genius stuff. I got to pause you for a minute. Now, Frater RC is also a genius and makes me sound like an idiot. But the thing that what you said about matter being an observer, he really, really made me have to defend Aleister Crowley, because it's honestly, he did not sit in that house and do the Abramelin, right? You can say what you want about his magical career, but one of the principal things of magic, makes me sound very smart yet again, is that the physical world has body in the astral as well. okay? And that's why we're
Right.
gifted with a body and why we have the ability to change our karma and to do all these things, because there's some truth to what you said in some magical way that by having matter, we automatically influence the astral. So if you do something like with your arms, you're also doing it in the astral. That's why they emphasize all these physical movements and making sounds. And then presumably, if you are experienced enough, you can bypass having to do the physical stuff and just do it in the astral. But, you know, it's like you said, just by virtue of their being material, it influences something. It's like it is like an observer magically anyway.
And that's what I'm saying. Is like it depends on what kind of matter you are, because like we're a more complex matter that like we have the will to move our arms and to move a rock around or to cut a tree down. Like we are able to do that with our, you know. And that's why humans are endowed with a spirit, because we have these motivations to do these things and they're innate in our bodies. Like a tree, for example, it may have a will to grow towards the sunlight, right?
It certainly seems like plants do that. You know what I mean?
No, they're alive, but they're living on a different time scale than we are. Like they respond at a slower time rate than we do. So that's what I'm saying is like different beings with different levels of awareness respond and interpret things at a slower time rate. Like they have a different perception of time. It doesn't mean that they're not responding. Same with rocks. It's like, okay, a rock can't really respond, but if you think about it, okay, what is a rock made out of? Minerals.
Well, all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration.
Well, no, let's not be fucking snarky about it.
Well, it's true. I mean, a rock is not as
made out of like molecules, right?
Oh,
of
like
minerals.
Carbon and
yeah. And silica and like just trace minerals.
Sometimes
metals.
The same stuff we're made of.
Right. And then in what relation, like what is a molecule is just atoms in relation to each other as a unit. So the atoms are a unit, like a family unit almost, in a sea of other minerals that form the rock. So like the rock changes depending on how those molecules interact with each other over time and how they can withstand the elements that they're exposed to, depending on the environment they're in. So in a way, a rock at a molecular level can respond the same way that a living organism can at a cellular level. So we're just a step up from, you know what I'm saying? Like we're a step up from rocks, but at the same time, a rock or a piece of dirt has a consciousness that can be measured, you know, with experimentation. It shows in quantum interactions if there's other molecules or other matter around it affects the interaction.
Well, this is the scientific side of the phrase, all is mind.
Correct, but it's very, very minute amount is what I'm saying. Because a living bacterium has way more brain power than, you know, a rock. But I'm not saying that you can't discount that the fact that a rock is there doesn't mean something doesn't happen.
And an angel of the Lord came unto me, snatching me up from my place of slumber, took me on high and higher still until we moved to the spaces betwixt the earth itself, and he brought me into a vast farmland of our own Midwest. And as we descended, cries of impending doom rose from the soil. 1,000, nay, 1,000,000 voices full of fear and terror possessed me then, and I begged, Angel of the Lord, what are these tortured screams? And the angel said unto me, These are the cries of the carrots. The cries of the carrots. You see, Reverend Mari, tomorrow is harvest day, and to them, it is the Holocaust. And I sprang from my slumber, drenched in the sweat like the tears of one terrified brothers, and roared, Hear me now, I've seen the light. They have a consciousness. They have a life. They have a soul. Damn you, let the rabbits wear glasses. Save our brothers. Can I get an amen? Can I get a hallelujah? Thank you, Jesus.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. Oh my God, that was beautiful.
One of my favorite moments in life was leaving in a Perfect Circle concert, and the whole crowd on the way out started banging on the gates of Universal City. It's just like they have big gates, and they were banging the Disgustipated beat, and then everyone started singing along. It was so dope. It was one of those weird tribal human things.
Yeah. Or like when you do the stomp, stomp, clap, we will rock you stuff, and everybody does that, or they do the wave.
I want to be in a wave. I've never been in a wave.
Oh, it's fun.
So since I'm a insufferable nerd that's never been in a wave because I've never been to an NFL game, when I got into Magic, I didn't get a cape, like I said. I got into the Platonic Solids because I figure, what else could be bound by perfectly adamantine, unchangeable, immutable conditions of the universe? I mean, you have these rules. There are rules in life. If you take regular convex polyhedra, how many can you make with the equal polygons as the same shapes and faces? I don't know if I said that right. How many dice can you make with the same shape on every face? You know what I mean? Like, how many of those can you make? You'd think there'd be like, you'd be like, well, I don't know, like 100? You'd be like 1,000, 1,000,000, infinite? Because like nature's kind of creative in geometry. You have all these things to choose from. It's like, the answer is 5. It's only 5. No more, no less. 5. I thought that was pretty interesting. So I was like, that's my starting point in magic. You know what I mean? Like, if you have to break things down to... Have you ever done a circle of life, Mari?
Maybe.
Now, if you didn't have traditional tools and all you had was something where you could approximate a compass, you could draw a circle, right? And then you take the midpoint and you move that to the edge of the circle, and then you draw another circle, and then the edge of that circle, it like sweeps through the midpoint of your last circle, and it creates like a little vesica Pisces in the middle, which looks like a, female anatomy, right? Now, if you keep doing the shit, right? You keep going to each overlapping point and drawing a circle, it creates the flower of life, right? And it just so happens. Yes, 6. 6, not 7. 6, not 5. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where I started with magic. It was like, I don't know where to start.
I use a cardinal cross in a circle. So I use in Hinduism, they use a wheel, like the wheel of life in tarot.
Okay, yes.
I use a bisection of 4. Like I simplify it to horizontal and vertical. But you could subdivide it however you like. It just has to be even. Being
even is very important in Flatland, and we will get to that. And in this whole thing of Platonic Solids, because, like I said, anyone who's played D&D is familiar with these shapes. There's 5 of them. You got your 4-sider, you got your 6-sider, you got your 8-sider, you got your 20-sider, and your 12-sider.
Yeah, like I rolled a 20.
Yeah, that's the icosahedron. Anyway, I don't know. I hope there's somebody out there that finds it as fascinating to me that if you sit there for infinity, you can only make 5 of these shapes, right? So like, why is that interesting? Like, you cannot take a hexagram and make it into a dice. You cannot do it. So I guess what I'm getting at is I was like, all right, there are certain things that are built into reality that you have to start from and work from.
Or things condensed down to, and is the simplest form of, I would say. Like, not only can you build out of it, but things condense down to it. Like if you try to like pick apart an atom, it'll resemble one of these things. Like,
yes, it will.
The way energy forms will like resemble one of these 5 aspects.
So from what I understand, the first time these show up in historical record is 2,000 years ago in ancient Scotland. And they didn't just find the 5 Platonic solids, they found many variations that were more than just beyond those 5 classic ones. It seemed like they were maybe trying to approach these solids or find the most efficient way to pack things, or they could have just been toys. We're not really sure. But we do know that if we return back to another text that we got great effect from before, the Timaeus, where he talks about the demiurge, the dude just keeps talking and keeps talking and keeps talking until he gets to something that sounds like the Platonic solids. But before we dive into that, maybe we should tell the audience what they are. Besides, we told them that they're D&D dice, but I guess we could get a little more descriptive, right?
So like fire is a tetrahedron.
Yep. And that's a pyramid, but not a pyramid.
Yeah, it's a pyramid. It's not a pyramid with 4. It's not a pyramid with 4 sides. Think of it like 3 sides, and then the bottom is the 4th face.
Yes, that's important.
And then it has 4 vertices where everything comes together.
Those are points, right?
Where everything like points out, and then 6 edges.
So what's the next one?
Earth, which is what I like, which is a cube, and it has 6 faces. If you roll it out, it looks like cross.
That's true. And that's how it's presented in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. If you have the Thoth deck, go ahead and flip it over. Whoop, there it is.
And
the 22 petals of the tarot of the thing are coming out of the center, and that's how you make them the sigils. But we'll get to that maybe.
And if you could roll out a hypercube in 3-dimensional space, it would look like a Minecraft. Like if you built a cross in Minecraft, and then you placed a brick on either side of the center of the cross so that it looks like one from either direction. So like a hypercube would look like that in 3 dimensions.
Thank you, Mari. That's really easy to envision, actually.
But you would never see it. That's a projection. That's like a shadow.
That's a shadow, yeah.
So when you experience it in 3 dimensions, it would look like a portal, like an orb. And then when you walk into it, you would walk into a different room. And then you'd keep walking into the orb would be like more of a portal. It would be like a fisheye lens. And there would be multiple rooms within one area.
It gets kind of multiplicitous and fisheye lensy at some point. It really does. Even even your smartest YouTubers are like, there's no way to visualize this. I'm sorry.
But that's when people talk about hyperspace or something, or dimensional travel or hyperspace travel, or that's kind of what they're talking about is a hypercube. Earth also has 8 points and 12 edges.
Oh, I forgot to say that. Yeah, the cube, 6 faces, 8 points, 12 edges.
Okay. And then air is an octahedron.
Yes.
Which would look like a little low poly snowball with 8 faces, 6 points, and 12 edges.
Why would you say snowball? Isn't it just a double pyramid?
Yeah, it could be, but I mean, I guess I thought it would be more like a cube.
An octahedron? It is a little bit like a cube, and it's considered a dual to the cube. So you're not far off, but it's technically speaking, if you took a pyramid like from ancient Egypt, like those pyramids, and then you made a mirror reflection of them so they were double pointed, that's an octahedron.
Oh, okay. Here's the thing, you guys. Remember the Star of David, which is to the chalice of female with the air symbol of male?
Yes.
Of the dagger intersecting each other to make the Star of David. So air, the octahedron, would be the 3-dimensional representation of those two things interfacing.
If their butts were touching. If you were in a 3D program and you took those two things and you smashed them together, you would make a star tetrahedron or a Star of David.
It's like a Merkaba?
Yes.
Okay, so like a Merkaba, okay, that is the shape of your aura too.
No, I'm wrong. I'm wrong, actually. I can hear you hippies yelling to me through the astral through the 5th dimension right now. No, Luke, a star tetrahedron is 2 fucking tetrahedron, not octahedrons, bro. So I'm wrong. Okay, no, yes. It's two pyramids connected at their butts, basically, the octahedron.
Oh, so there's no top points.
There's 2 top points. It's like...
Is it a Merkaba or not?
No. It's a little bit like an hourglass if you made the fat parts touch instead of the skinny parts. And it's 2 pyramids.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Like the pyramids of Egypt touching at their butts.
It's a rupee.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. You could cut out all that other bullshit.
No, it's hard to understand. How many faces has it got, Mari?
It has 8 faces, because it's an octahedron.
Okay, it's got 6 vertices or points and 12 edges. And like I said, it's a dual of the cube. What does that mean? It means if you take the midpoints of all the lines on the octahedron and you make those the vertices instead of the midpoints, it becomes a cube. And the same thing with the cube. If you take the midpoints and you turn those into the vertices, then it becomes an octahedron.
They're 3D fractals, dude.
And then the tetrahedron is a dual of itself. I don't know if we need...
So, isosahedron is a dual of the tetrahedron?
Not tetrahedron, of the dodecahedron. So the 20-sider and the 12-sider, once again, if you take if you take an icosahedron and you go to the midpoint and you make that the new vertice or the new points, then it becomes a dodecahedron and vice versa. So they're kind of like interflipped of each other as well.
Oh, I see that they're flipped because the points and the faces are interchangeable.
Yes. Then, interestingly, if you take all of them and you take the number of vertices minus the number of edges plus the number of faces, they all equal the number 2.
Oh.
which is also the number of gloves that didn't fit O.J. Simpson when he was acquitted of 2 counts of murder in October 1995. Not relevant.
Calm down.
It just popped in there. It's okay if we share our relative confusion in the middle part there, because to be fair, if I went to the Timaeus, all right, these guys talk and talk and talk, and they say weird stuff like, oh, if you cut the octahedron in half, it suddenly becomes the fire element, which is the tetrahedron. It's like, no, it doesn't. Like, even they were confused. Like, what's a tetrahedron? What's a pyramid? What's a, like, it's that, maybe I'm reading it wrong, but they did sound just a tiny, here, let them speak in their own words. In the first place, then, as is evident to all, fire and earth and water and air are bodies, and every sort of body possesses solidity, and every solid must necessarily be contained in planes, and every plane rectangular figure is composed of triangles, and all triangles are originally of 2 kinds, both of which are made up of 1 right and 2 acute angles. One of them has at either end of the base the half of a divided right angle having equal sides, while the other, the right angle, is divided into unequal parts having unequal sides. These, then, proceeding by a combination of probability and demonstration, we assume to be the original elements of fire and the other bodies, but the principles which are prior to these God only knows, and he of men who is a friend of God. And next, we have to determine what are the 4 most beautiful bodies which are unlike one another, and which some are capable of resolution into one another. For having discovered thus much, we shall know the true origin of earth and fire and of the proportionate and intermediate elements, and then we shall not be willing to allow that there are any distinct kinds of visible bodies fairer than these. So, did that make sense to everybody? Was that like
Purdy?
So, I've been told by people with abbreviations after their name that they're talking about the Platonic Solids, right? The same very shapes we were just discussing. I'm not a math doctor, but it sounds a little bit like the conversation you receive from a homeless person on public transit. You know, going with the idea that these are the Platonic Solids being mentioned. Like, why are they talking about like triangles that are not equilateral? If anyone can tell me that, please explain this to me. Like, is there any reason to invoke anything but equalateral triangles when we're talking about this? Okay, let's continue.
If you divide a square in half, then it makes something similar to that.
Okay, you're right.
Right angle triangle.
Oh, and so they're getting all philosophic with the triangles, maybe?
Well, you know what I was going to say? They were prophesizing 3D modeling, because that's literally how polygons work. Like, every structure you could imagine could be made out of triangles. Right? Triangles are more versatile than equilateral.
Really? Well, to the Flatlanders, nothing is better than having all sides equal. But then they're Flatlanders.
Yeah.
They have depth, but they don't have height. That's the thing. They have depth and width, but we'll get there. Timaeus clarifies what he just said in the following. Now is the time to explain what was before obscurely said. There was an error in imagining that all the 4 elements might be generated by and into one another. This, I say, was an erroneous supposition, for there are generated from the triangles which we have selected 4 kinds, 3 from the one which has the sides unequal. The 4th alone is framed out of the isosceles triangle. Hence, they cannot all be resolved into one another. A great number of small bodies being combined into a few large ones, or the converse, but 3 of them can be thus resolved and compounded, for they all spring from the one. And when the greater bodies are broken up, many small bodies will spring up out of them and take their own proper figures. Or again, when many small bodies are dissolved into their triangles, if they become one, they will form one large mass of another kind. So much for their passage into one another. I have now to speak of their several kinds and show out of what combinations of numbers each of them was formed. The first will be the most simple and smallest construction, and its elements is that triangle which has its hypotenuse twice the lesser side. When 2 such triangles are joined at the diagonal, and this is repeated 3 times, and the triangles rest their diagonals and shorter sides on the same point as the center, a single equilateral triangle is formed out of 6 triangles, and 4 equilateral triangles, if put together, make out of every 3 plane angles 1 solid angle, being that which is nearest to the most obtuse of plane angles, and out of the combination of these 4 angles arises the first solid form, which distributes into equal and similar parts the whole circle in which it is inscribed. The second species of solid is formed out of the same triangles, which unite as 8 equilateral triangles and form 1 solid angle out of the 4 plane angles, and out of 6 such angles the second body is completed. And
oh, Jesus.
Hold on. And the third body is made up of 120 triangle elements, altogether 20 bases, each of which is an equilateral triangle. The one element, that is the triangle, which is its hypotenuse twice. You know what I mean? Like, what is he saying, man? Like,
he's an engineer, clearly.
like, there's more.
Can you draw a picture of this?
No, really. But at some point he says, yet was the fifth combination which God used in the delineation of the universe.
We gotta get to that point, though. You skipped all this shit.
The one element, that is the triangle, which has at its hypotenuse twice the lesser size, having generated these figures, generated no more, but the isosceles triangle produced the fourth elementary figure, which is compounded of four such triangles joining their right angles in a center and forming one equilateral quadrangle. 6 of these united from 8 solid angles, each of which is made by the combination of 3 plane right angles. The figure of the body thus composed is a cube. So there's a cube in here, having 6 plane quadrilateral equilateral bases. Yet was there a fifth combination which God used in the delineation of the universe. So from what I'm getting from this, it sounds like he described the 4 of the 5 Platonic solids, and you have to probably take it in the butt to even learn about the 5th and take an oath of secrecy and do.
It sounds good to me. Where do I sign?
I'm pretty sure you also have to have a penis, but I don't know.
Huh?
Not in 2020, or 2021, but like back in their day. I can
go get one. Just give me 5 minutes. I've got one in my closet.
Did Plato or Pythagoras allow women in his? No, they spoke very poorly of women. That's part of the joke of Flatlanders.
They like little boys, dude.
They did not initiate women into the dodeca. I do not believe. Nor did they even want you to hear.
Women in Flatland weren't women needles? Wait, yeah, women were needles, right?
Well, not technically, but yes, in practice, yes.
In the Flatland book, women were needles, and they would pierce the male to have sex with them.
I don't remember the sex part. That was maybe left out of the version I read.
That's how they would procreate.
That's how they would kill their husbands, because they were the most deadly.
Oh yeah, that's how they would kill them.
Well, I think we're there already. It's like
spiders. It's the same thing.
I've made my point. They speak very poorly of women in the Timaeus, and am I qualified to say that Edwin A. Abbot's Flatlanders is quite possibly, maybe just a little bit, a satire of the Timaeus?
Maybe.
Because you are a mathematician. You want to learn about these Platonic solids. You can understand all that stuff I just said that I'm probably going to have to speed up so I don't lose like every listener. You can understand all that stuff, right? And you have to read through Plato talking about how, if you are bad in life, you might reincarnate as someone on a lower caste. And then you might, if you're worse, reincarnate as an animal. And then if you're really terrible, you might reincarnate as a woman, right? So let's say you're a mathematician. You have to get through all that bullshit to get to the Platonic solids. And Edwin A. Abbott's Flatlanders is very much written in the same way. You have to hear chapter after chapter about the strange life of these geometric creatures and their bizarre intellectualizations about everything, including the low station of women and
politics and war and bullshit like that.
It goes on and on, but it's not entirely devoid of the analogy that's helping you understand what's going on to prepare you for the lower dimension and the higher dimension. Because to my delight, the main character, which is a square, who's a lawyer and a mathematician, because it's kind of the same thing in their world.
Me.
He has a dream where he visits a lower dimension and then he visits a higher dimension, and then they even discuss the same higher dimension that we're trying to discuss in this episode. So it's great. It doesn't really skip a beat. It's pretty succinct, and for someone who doesn't read so well, go ahead and pick it up, man. It's a good one.
It's really thin.
Yeah, so for me, it was exceedingly thick, but it was just thick enough.
No, it's a nice I guess it's like watching a movie. You could just sit down and read it in a day or 2 days. You just go to bed with it. But it's like literally like not even that thick. It's like twice as long as like a kid's storybook.
It seems like psychedelic math pro-woman speculative philosophy. It's very interesting. So now that I've told you it's satire, I could talk about their treatment of people in their society, and I'm not like representing it or whatever. So the Flatlanders are written from the perspective of, like I said, a Flatlander who's a square, and they live in a world that is completely deprived of what we experience in 3 dimensions, like depth, color, shade, and they've never really beholden an angle. They live in a flat, gray, uniformly lit world where fog is considered a blessing because it allows them to see how angles recede into the background. Whereas in the more arid regions, it's very difficult to tell what shape is facing you or approaching you because, well, it's hard to even explain what they see. What they see is like a long strip.
There's light. You can see light reflecting off the angles, but you're right. Like when there's fog, it's better. You can see how long they are. That's the thing. Is like fog helps you with depth, and then the light helps you with width.
Imagine if you were playing Wolfenstein 3D from back in the day, and you just deleted everything except the middle band of pixels on your display, or
like you just saw walls. You just encountered walls.
Or
no floors, no ceilings, no bad guys, just walls. If someone's standing in front of you, there'd be like a hole. Like wherever the, landscape was, there'd be like a big, like gray hole wherever that was.
Well, okay, so to begin, you have all these classes of people in their civilization, which are determined based on how many sides they have. The priests are considered circular, but upon closer inspection, they really have just so many sides that you can't see them anymore. Tell. And the higher level of class, the more dependent you are on using your eyesight as a form of determining what another shape is. And it's unbecoming to even touch a circle. Circles are not to be touched. So
at the top tier, they're probably just playing a game of pin the tail on the donkey, where they never pin a tail because they can't tell who is actually more circular than the other.
Right. So the rabble are frequently accused of just not being able to know who's who. But it is kind of important because the rabble are the ones with the most acute angles. And so it's an issue of balance in their universe that the ones with the most acute angles who have the most potential to cause damage are also by degree less intelligent and so less capable in inflicting, said damage, or being mentally capable of inflicting maximum damage with their acute angles. And so the more rounded you become, the more intelligent you are, the higher your station in society.
And the less you can actually physically defend yourself.
Well, here's the thing. The more acute you are, the closer you are determined, the more you're considered womanly, because women are basically, like you said, they're a straight line.
Yeah.
And they're considered inherently dangerous because if they're facing directly towards you, they're pretty much invisible, but their eyes radiate a glow. So that really mostly just applies when their backs are faced. And so women have to live with this decree from civilization that they must constantly sing what is called a peace song and sway their butts back and forth. And that like the higher class women supposedly are the ones that are married to the more higher class shapes. They have a more sophisticated way of swaying their butt, whereas the lower class women just like tick it back and forth, like tick, 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 and it's not very elegant or something like that.
Yeah, just to get by.
Yeah, because they're considered dangerous. Like, so if a man like runs into a woman, it's her fault because he'll like pop like a balloon, like on her like sharp edge.
One thing I really like about this society is that women are most likely to be serial killers.
Well, they're more like manslaughterers, you could say. That's how they're considered. Although the novel, whatever you want to call this thing, it seems like it's a pretty biting satire of patriarchal society because, man, they really, really reduce the women.
Tigers in a cage, yeah.
Like, okay, so because women have such sharp angles, if they get anything so much as a disease that causes involuntary movement, like seizures or even a sneeze, it's punishable by death.
And they have to stay in the house unless they let everyone know that they're leaving.
Yeah, and they have to sing a peace song, and they have a specific entrance that only they go through. And the houses themselves are actually designed to minimize a woman's movement and deadly capacity.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this read. It's really crazy how in-depth it gets.
Likewise, there was a time when the teaching of women of geometry was more of a thing, but for some reason, there's a reason why they exclude women now. And they say that it's become a matter of inefficiency and harm to the men because the way women, how they raise the children, they don't raise them geometrically. They raise them in the same terms that, quote, women think, in terms of emotion. And it's actually, some of them are like noble things that we would consider in 5D space. Ideas of duty, patriotism, stuff like that. They're all considered to be like these emotional, like wishy-washy kind of non-geometric ideas. And then once a child is of a certain age, they're basically like, listen, you only talk that way with the women. We're going to go initiate you into like the real way you're supposed to think, which is how the men think. And the ultimate core thing that is like the monolithic idea that determines all of their thought is that everything is structure. It's all about structure, baby. There's no like right or wrong necessarily. Like you get the idea that there's a value on human life, but the value of human life is based on how harmonious the overall structure is, and society is oriented around the progression of lower forms into higher forms. And this happens slower for the lower castes. So it might take an isosceles family many generations in order to produce an equilateral triangle. And then it'll take a little less time for an equilateral triangle to produce a square, and then a square to a pentagon. And then by the time you get to like 50-sidedness, you can start like advancing like maybe 10 sides and then maybe 20 sides after that. But once you get up to a certain level, there's like this evil ritual where like the priest class that has over 500 sides and is considered like pretty fucking circular, they oftentimes give up their firstborn to this class that it's not really a class.
Satanism.
They try to reform them with like way more sides than they should have. And they say 1 out of 10 of them actually survive, but the ones that do advance society so much that it's considered like a good trade-off.
Dude, what is this guy? Like, I gotta look into this guy. This sounds too real.
It's pretty dark, but the families that get that advanced, like, they're like, yes, we've advanced society, because it's
describing the Illuminati, my guy.
And also the lower classes are just known to like kill themselves and kill each other because they're so pointy. And then that's the other thing is like, if you don't speak a woman's language and you don't placate her, she might just kill everyone in the household. That's like a constant.
I know. She's sharp.
Like, it doesn't matter how wise you are or how high of a class you are or even how edgy you are, like how acute your angles are, she can still kill you easier than anything at any point.
Yep. If she leaves the house and comes back in, she might kill you.
Also, they're kind of hard to distinguish from circles, strangely, which is their priest class.
Yep. But they have to turn, which they also look like a 3-dimensional circle moving through space-time. They can appear if they want to. So they have a lot of power, but they're constricted a lot.
And then when the square finds himself going to line land, which is a world where you can only move on one axis, like you can never move past your neighbor, which is just another point. And you would never touch your other neighbor because it causes problems. And there's like all these different rules. When the king of line land first, well, that's the thing is they both accuse each other of being women when they encounter each other. The square sees the line and he's like, what do you want, woman? Like, why do you approach me this way? Right? And then there's like one of the little points on the line is like, I'm the king of Line Land. How dare you address me that way, woman? And he's like, why are you calling me woman? He's like, I could tell you only have one tone in your voice and the women only have one mouth and the men have 2 mouths. And is like, you're some distorted woman monster. And they constantly invoke like womanhood and like as like a negative as other. Yeah. Other. But it's always from the perspective that like, if you're getting the book, you see how absurd it is, right?
You're gay. Literally, like, that's what's happening.
Mari actually is, so she could say that, right? She gets a pass.
Well, I only get a half pass. So someone can slap my bum.
All right, whatever.
You can't punch me in the nose, but you can slap my bum.
I didn't say it. So if it is a critique of our culture, I guess you could sum it up in basically what Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Luke after he's been accused of lying about his father. He says, so much of what we consider truth is a matter of our own perspective. But in this case, it's literal. Like, how are we supposed to imagine 4 and 5 dimensions?
We're not.
Well, that's why this novel exists, is because it's a very long analogy on how to imagine it. And
It's supposed to humble you.
It's certainly, yeah, I think it, and it's also supposed to make you kind of critical of higher dimensional beings that come to you because they can't understand what your life is like and they're completely ignorant of dimensions above them.
Like, it's really hard for them to empathize with you. Exactly. So if you were to encounter a higher dimensional being, if they scare you or do something terrifying, don't blame them. They don't understand what it's like to be like you. It's like looking at ants through a magnifying glass and you accidentally burn them with the sun. Like, you're like, oh, shit, sorry. But you just fucking ruined someone's life, you know? Like, but you're not cognizant of that because it's like, oh, well, there's like 500 others. So it's like, cool, right?
Please move to the next parallel dimension. I wonder if Ray is even thinking about what Gozer's going to do to the parallel dimension. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't he have any empathy for their dimension? It's probably best that he fight right there. Stand his ground.
Man, when do I get to talk about my theory?
For the Patreons, but
okay,
they paid $5 to hear the extended episode, but we're not done on the free episode. We got to finish talking about Flatland because we didn't just bring it up to discuss how badly we've treated women throughout history, which we have, and on this show we have discussed that there's probably, in my personal opinion, the feminine oracular structure of religion is probably more reliable, but we won't go there right now. There is
support the women's.
Support the women's. I support the women's.
Bra support the women's.
I support. Oh, okay. So, how do you imagine? Well, like, how does a two-dimensional person imagine a three-dimensional person? Well, it's kind of impossible. So, like, when a three-dimensional person comes to visit a two-dimensional person, it's like, imagine if there's a circle who's a dude and he's observing on his flat plane, like, his universe. Well, if you were to stick, like, a balloon through his flat plane, it would appear to him that he was seeing a circle, which is like a member of the priest class. But really, the balloon's a bit closer to a sphere. And even then, it's, you know, in our example, it's not a sphere. It's like a weird shaped oblong thing with a little nipple badoop on the end.
Where it intersects with that plane, it appears to be a circle that grows and shrinks.
Which is impossible for a Flatlander because that happens, yeah. That's either they see that when something is either going towards them or away from them very quickly, right?
Or like if a woman is turning, so they might mistake it for a woman. But the thing is, it's like if they go to the side of it, like if they try to go around it, it'll still be the same length unless it pulls out or moves in. So it won't make sense to them perspective-wise. It'll look like either a sphere that's throbbing or it'll look like a circle, or it'll look like a woman that's like facing them constantly.
Or facing to the side of them constantly.
Yeah, facing to the side of them constantly.
But if it was foggy and if they were
or like randomly or something, like it sounds like they would see a ghost, honestly.
The lower class people wouldn't be able to tell unless they went up to touch, but a higher class person would be able to tell based on their art of seeing, which only their class is, you know, given the privilege of learning.
It sounds like they're woke.
A touch of a line is worth the sight of a circle is a common saying, I believe, amongst the women of Flatland. It's basically like saying, well, I could just touch this person and see who they are. Because you know about someone.
Or I could poke their brains out.
Yeah. I mean, usually if you're a lower class person that can't see the angle, you're encouraged and you're most likely to go and grope that person's angle to see what kind of angle they are. But if you went and touched, you know, like the angle, like if you touched a balloon, you'd be like, oh my God, this is the most circular thing I've ever touched, which is what happens. And so because the Flatlander is one, he's a plane. He's a square, and so to us, he's a plane. The first time he sees a cube in 3 dimensions, it looks like he's seeing the inside of a square that's like woven together all like human centipede style to itself into a cube, which is also psychedelic because he's never seen dimension before. So a cube is actually sort of like beautiful and horrifying to him just by virtue of the difference of his life and his conditions of his dimension versus the conditions of another, which is kind of interesting. Like, are spirits inherently scary for some reason? Or like...
Yes, because they change they seem to phase through walls and stuff. Like, that makes sense because something above our dimension would be able to see simultaneously into every room at once. You know what I mean? Like when they look at a house, like we were talking about with the box.
Yeah, they would. They would be able to, like, are you undressing me with your eyes, baby? And it's like, well, I've got a little bit more than that going on.
Oh, yeah. It's like looking at the textures from The Sims. I don't know if you guys ever, like, dug through your files when you installed a game and you saw the textures and they're like an unskinned human. It's like you could, like, scroll through shit and see, like, the actual assets in front of you rather than it being like, oh, here's a wall and a door and I must open the door to go into the next room to see the next room. Like, they don't have that constraint.
So it takes a bit of training for the square to learn to even see what a cube is. And then he actually gets to the point with his guide, who's a sphere. And he says, now, does this mean that there's another place that's even more spacious than this space? And that there's maybe like, well, by analogy and by algorithm, if I have 4 cardinal points, or what you call vertices, and you have 8, wouldn't that mean that there's another sort of like more super cube that has 16? And then the cube is like, what the fuck are you talking about, little square?
It's fractal, dude.
Because the square figures it out. He's like, oh, well, if I just apply that, because he's a mathematician. That's all he does. Their whole society is math. They don't have to worry about stuff like light and color. And in fact, they once had color and they outlawed it because it became too problematic and it gave the lower classes too much power, and the women.
The women's.
It gave them all too much power. There's even one part where there was a major battle going on and it became so overwhelming with color that the Circle, who was in charge of the army, said that he was giving up his scepter for the paintbrush in that very moment because he was so inspired by the color of the battle. But eventually the Circle class, who has power over the rest of society, decided that once they were being put upon to have color placed upon them, that it would cause the decline of all civilization and make women equal to priests, and it would just cause the eventual like socialization of all of society. And there was like a violent thing that, and basically color is outlawed, and you can only in universities is it allowed. But point being, Square Dude is like, hey, yeah, so like maybe there's a super cube that instead of like having faces, it has like a whole 3-dimensional cube for a face. And then the regular cube is like, okay, dude, you're going back to Flatland now. So he was trying to, the square was trying to explain a tesseract, and the sphere was like, okay, fuck you, I can't handle this.
Yep.
And if you can handle any more of this, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where $5 earns you all our extended episodes. I'll send you a sticker at no additional cost. You'll get access to our Discord server where you can actually harass Mari in real time at work and cause her a mental breakdown, which is what I do. Which is what I do. No, don't do that, please. Well, I mean, don't come for the expressed reason of doing that. Please come for the expressed reason of eating carrots and shooting lasers.